The ability to think clearly is your greatest power in a world full of noise. Introduction.
Most people never learn how to think. They just absorb what they're told. They scroll. They react. They follow the crowd. They live on autopilot, never questioning why they believe what they believe. But you're not most people. You picked up this book because something in you wants more. More clarity, more control, more truth. In a world that profits from your confusion, your ability to think clearly is your greatest weapon. This book is not about memorizing facts or sounding smart. It's about teaching you how to see through illusions, cut through noise, and decide with purpose. It's about thinking like a strategist, a detective, a builder, a master. Inside these pages, you'll learn how to destroy hidden mental traps that weaken your decisions, spot lies and manipulation in media, people, and yourself. Ask smarter questions and challenge assumptions. Use elite mental tools to solve real problems. And most importantly, build a mind that serves you, not the system. This isn't a school book. It's a wake-up call. Because once you master critical thinking, you don't just win debates. You start winning in life. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Critical Thinking. The Noise Problem. We live in what researchers call the post-truth era. Not because truth no longer exists, but because the sheer volume of information makes it increasingly difficult to distinguish truth from falsehood, fact from opinion, and evidence from speculation. Consider these daily challenges. The speed of information. News breaks faster than fact-checkers can verify it. Social media algorithms prioritize engagement over accuracy, spreading sensational but false stories at lightning speed. By the time corrections are made, the misinformation has already shaped public opinion. The democratization of publishing. Anyone with an internet connection can publish content that looks professional and authoritative. The traditional gatekeepers of information, editors, fact-checkers, and publishers, have been bypassed, creating a wild west of unverified claims. The echo chamber effect. Algorithms create personalized information bubbles, showing us content that confirms our existing beliefs while filtering out contradictory evidence. This makes it harder to encounter diverse perspectives and challenge our assumptions. The complexity of modern problems. Climate change, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and global economics involve intricate systems that resist simple explanations. Yet we're constantly presented with oversimplified solutions and false dichotomies. In this environment, the ability to think critically isn't just helpful. It's essential for survival and success. What critical thinking actually means. Critical thinking is often misunderstood as simply being negative or finding flaws in everything. This misconception leads people to dismiss it as pessimistic or destructive. In reality, critical thinking is profoundly constructive and optimistic. It's based on the belief that through careful reasoning, we can arrive at better understanding and make wiser decisions. At its core, critical thinking is the disciplined process of actively analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to reach well-reasoned conclusions. It involves several key components. Systematic questioning. Rather than accepting information at face value, critical thinkers ask probing questions. Who says this? What evidence supports it? What are the underlying assumptions? What alternative explanations exist? What are the implications if this is true or false? Evidence evaluation. Critical thinking requires the ability to assess the quality, relevance, and sufficiency of evidence. Not all evidence is created equal. A peer-reviewed scientific study carries more weight than an anonymous blog post, and first-hand experience often trumps hearsay. Logical reasoning. This involves understanding how ideas connect, recognizing valid and invalid arguments, and identifying logical fallacies. It's about following the thread of reasoning to see where it leads and whether the conclusions actually follow from the premises. Perspective taking. Critical thinkers actively seek out different viewpoints and consider how their own biases might be influencing their judgment. They understand that their perspective is just one among many possible ways of seeing an issue. Reflective judgment. This is the metacognitive aspect of critical thinking about thinking. It involves monitoring your own thought processes, recognizing when you might be making assumptions, and adjusting your approach when needed. The anatomy of clear thinking. To understand critical thinking more deeply, imagine your mind as a courtroom. Information enters as testimony, and your role is that of both judge and jury. You must examine the witnesses. Who is providing this information? What are their credentials, motivations, and potential biases? Are they reliable sources with a track record of accuracy, or are they known for sensationalism or agenda-driven content? Evaluate the evidence. What type of evidence is being presented? Is it direct observation, statistical data, expert testimony, or personal anecdote? How is this evidence gathered, and could there be alternative explanations for what's being observed? Consider the arguments. How does the evidence connect to the conclusions being drawn? Are there logical leaps or missing steps in the reasoning? Could the same evidence support different conclusions? Deliberate carefully. Before reaching a verdict, you must weigh all the evidence, consider alternative explanations, and acknowledge the limitations of your knowledge. Sometimes the most honest conclusion is, I don't have enough information to decide. This metaphor illustrates why critical thinking feels effortful. It requires you to slow down, resist the urge to jump to conclusions, and do the hard work of careful analysis. The historical roots of critical thinking. The foundation of critical thinking wasn't built overnight. It has deep historical roots that stretch back thousands of years, shaped by philosophers, scientists, and thinkers who dare to question conventional wisdom. Ancient origins. Socrates, the Greek philosopher, is often considered the father of critical thinking. His method of questioning, known as the Socratic method, involved asking probing questions to expose the contradictions and assumptions in people's beliefs. Rather than providing answers, Socrates helped people discover the limitations of their knowledge and think more deeply about complex issues. The scientific revolution, the 16th and 17th centuries, brought a systematic approach to questioning and testing ideas. Scientists like Galileo Galilei and Francis Bacon emphasized observation, experimentation, and evidence-based reasoning over reliance on authority or tradition. This period established the principles of skeptical inquiry that remain central to critical thinking today. The Enlightenment. The 18th century Enlightenment further refined critical thinking by emphasizing reason, individual liberty, and the scientific method. Thinkers like Voltaire, John Stuart Mill, and Immanuel Kant argued for the importance of thinking for oneself and questioning established authority. Modern developments. The 20th century brought psychology into the mix, with researchers studying how people actually think, the systematic biases that affect our judgment, and the conditions that promote clear reasoning. This research has given us a deeper understanding of both the power and limitations of human thinking. Why critical thinking is your superpower. In a world where information is abundant, but wisdom is scarce, critical thinking gives you several distinct advantages. Decision-making excellence. Whether you're choosing a career, making an investment, or deciding on a medical treatment, critical thinking helps you cut through the noise and focus on what matters most. You'll make fewer impulsive decisions and more choices that align with your values and goals. Intellectual independence. Critical thinkers are less susceptible to manipulation, whether by advertisers, politicians, or social media algorithms. They can evaluate claims independently and resist the pressure to conform to popular opinion when it conflicts with evidence. Creative problem solving. Contrary to popular belief, critical thinking enhances rather than inhibits creativity. By systematically examining problems from multiple angles, critical thinkers often discover innovative solutions that others miss. Effective communication. Understanding how to construct and evaluate arguments makes you a more persuasive communicator. You can present your ideas more clearly and respond more effectively to criticism or disagreement. Lifelong learning. Critical thinking provides the tools for continuous learning and adaptation. As new information becomes available or circumstances change, you can update your beliefs and approaches rather than clinging to outdated ideas. Reduced anxiety. While it might seem counterintuitive, critical thinking can actually reduce anxiety by helping you distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. When you can analyze risks rationally, you're less likely to be paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. The barriers to clear thinking. Despite its obvious benefits, critical thinking faces several obstacles in our daily lives. Cognitive overload. The sheer volume of information we encounter daily can overwhelm our analytical capacity. When we're mentally exhausted, we're more likely to rely on shortcuts and heuristics rather than careful analysis. Emotional interference. Strong emotions can cloud judgment and make it difficult to think clearly. Fear, anger, excitement, or sadness can all interfere with our ability to process information objectively. Social pressure. Humans are social creatures, and we often feel pressure to conform to group opinions rather than think independently. This can be particularly challenging when critical thinking leads to unpopular conclusions. Confirmation bias. We naturally seek information that confirms our existing beliefs while avoiding information that challenges them. This tendency can create blind spots in our thinking. The illusion of knowledge. Sometimes we think we understand something better than we actually do. This overconfidence can prevent us from seeking additional information or considering alternative perspectives. Time pressure. In our fast-paced world, we're often required to make quick decisions without the luxury of thorough analysis. This can lead to reliance on instinct rather than reasoned judgment. The components of critical thinking. Effective critical thinking involves several interrelated skills that work together like the instruments in an orchestra. Interpretation. The ability to understand and explain the meaning of information, events, or experiences. This involves recognizing the significance of data, clarifying concepts, and identifying the key elements of complex situations. Analysis. Breaking down complex information into its component parts to understand how they relate to each other. This includes identifying arguments, examining evidence, and detecting patterns or relationships. Evaluation. Assessing the credibility and logical strength of claims, arguments, and evidence. This involves judging the reliability of sources, the validity of reasoning, and the adequacy of evidence. Inference. Drawing reasonable conclusions from available evidence. This requires the ability to recognize what follows logically from the given information and to identify what additional information might be needed. Explanation. The ability to articulate your reasoning clearly and persuasively. This involves stating your conclusions, describing the evidence and reasoning that led to them, and addressing potential objections. Self-regulation. The metacognitive skill of monitoring and correcting your own thinking processes. This includes recognizing when you might be biased, questioning your assumptions, and adjusting your approach when necessary. The neuroscience of critical thinking. Recent advances in neuroscience have given us fascinating insights into what happens in the brain during critical thinking. When we engage in analytical reasoning, several brain regions work together. The prefrontal cortex. This region is responsible for executive functions like planning, decision-making, and working memory. It's particularly active during complex reasoning tasks. The anterior cingulate cortex. This area helps detect conflicts and inconsistencies in information, alerting us when something doesn't add up. The temporal lobes. These regions are involved in processing and storing information, helping us access relevant knowledge and experiences. The default mode network. This network is active when we're not focused on specific tasks, and it plays a role in creative thinking and making connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. Understanding the neuroscience of thinking helps explain why critical thinking can be mentally taxing. It requires the coordination of multiple brain systems and significant mental energy. Building your critical thinking foundation. Developing strong critical thinking skills is like building physical fitness. It requires consistent practice and gradual progression. Here are the foundational elements you'll need. Intellectual curiosity. Cultivate a genuine desire to understand how things work and why things happen. Ask questions not just to challenge others, but to deepen your own understanding. Intellectual humility. Recognize the limitations of your knowledge and be willing to change your mind when presented with compelling evidence. This doesn't mean being wishy-washy, but rather being open to growth and learning. Intellectual courage. Be willing to challenge popular opinions and stand up for your conclusions, even when it's uncomfortable. This includes being willing to admit when you're wrong. Intellectual empathy. Try to understand other people's perspectives, even when you disagree with them. This doesn't mean accepting all viewpoints as equally valid, but rather making an effort to understand how reasonable people might reach different conclusions. Intellectual integrity. Be honest about your own biases and limitations. Don't cherry-pick evidence to support predetermined conclusions, and be willing to acknowledge when the evidence doesn't support your preferred position. The path forward. Critical thinking is not a destination, but a journey, a lifelong commitment to intellectual growth and clarity. As you develop these skills, you'll find that they become more natural and automatic, but they will always require conscious effort and practice. In the chapters that follow, we'll explore specific strategies and techniques for developing each component of critical thinking. We'll examine common logical fallacies and how to avoid them, learn methods for evaluating evidence and sources, and practice applying these skills to real-world scenarios. Remember that becoming a skilled critical thinker is one of the most valuable investments you can make in yourself. In a world of increasing complexity and uncertainty, the ability to think clearly and reason effectively is not just an advantage. It's essential for success, fulfillment, and making a positive contribution to society. The foundation has been laid. Now let's build upon it, one careful thought at a time. This chapter has provided the conceptual groundwork for understanding critical thinking. In the next chapter, we'll explore the specific cognitive biases that can derail clear thinking and learn practical strategies for overcoming them. Chapter 2, The Art of Asking Better Questions. Powerful thinkers ask powerful questions. This chapter teaches you how to dig deeper and get to the truth faster. Every breakthrough in human history began with a question. When Isaac Newton asked, "Why did the apple fall?" he unlocked the laws of gravity. When Marie Curie wondered, "What makes certain elements glow?" she discovered radioactivity. When Steve Jobs questioned, "Why can't computers be beautiful and simple?" he revolutionized technology. The quality of your questions determines the quality of your thinking. Most people accept surface-level answers, but critical thinkers know that the first answer is rarely the complete truth. They dig deeper, ask follow-up questions, and refuse to be satisfied with incomplete explanations. This chapter will transform how you approach problems, conversations, and decisions by teaching you to ask questions that cut through confusion and reveal hidden truths. Part 1. The foundation of better questions. Why most questions fall short. Before we learn to ask better questions, we must understand why most questions fail to produce meaningful insights. Common questioning mistakes include surface-level inquiry, asking what happened, instead of why did this happen and what patterns led to this outcome. Binary thinking, forcing complex issues into yes/no questions when reality exists in shades of gray. Assumption loading, embedding unexamined assumptions into questions, such as, how can we fix this problem, before confirming a problem actually exists. Solution jumping, asking, how do we implement this solution, before thoroughly understanding the real challenge. The anatomy of a powerful question. Great questions share several characteristics. Specificity. Instead of, are you happy? Ask, what specific aspects of your work bring you the most satisfaction, and which drain your energy? Open-endedness. Questions that begin with what, how, and why typically yield richer responses than those starting with is or do. Assumption challenging. What if the opposite were true? Or what evidence would change your mind? Context expansion. How does this situation connect to larger patterns or systems? Part 2. The 5 levels of questioning. Imagine questions as an archaeological dig. Each level reveals deeper truths about any situation. Level 1. Information gathering. These questions establish basic facts. What happened? Who was involved? When did this occur? Where did it take place? Example. A project failed to meet its deadline. Level 1 question. What was the original deadline, and when was the project actually completed? Level 2. Analysis and patterns. These questions explore relationships and trends. Why did this happen? What patterns do you notice? How does this connect to previous experiences? What factors contributed to this outcome? Example, Level 2 question. What specific bottlenecks cause a delay and have similar issues appeared in other projects? Level 3, perspective and assumptions. These questions examine viewpoints and underlying beliefs. What assumptions are we making? How might someone else see this situation? What biases might be influencing our interpretation? What are we taking for granted? Example, Level 3 question. What assumptions did we make about team capacity, and how might the team members themselves describe the challenges they faced? Level 4, implications and consequences. These questions explore broader impacts. What are the long-term consequences? How does this affect other areas? What opportunities might this create? What would happen if we did nothing? Example, Level 4 question. How might these project delays affect our client relationships, team morale, and future resource allocation? Level 5, transformation and learning. These questions drive growth and innovation. What can we learn from this? How can we prevent similar issues? What new approaches might we try? How does this change our understanding? Example, Level 5 question. What new project management approaches could we pilot to build more realistic timelines while maintaining quality standards? Part 3, question categories for different situations. Questions for problem solving. Problem definition questions. What exactly is the problem we're trying to solve? Who says this is a problem and why? What would success look like? What constraints are we operating under? Root cause questions. What's causing this symptom? What's causing the cause? If we trace this back 5 steps, where do we end up? What would have to be true for this problem not to exist? Solution generation questions. What if we had unlimited resources? What if we had to solve this in 24 hours? How would insert innovative company/person approach this? What's the simplest possible solution? Questions for decision-making. Clarity questions. What decision are we actually making? What are we optimizing for? What's the real deadline? Who needs to be involved? Option exploration questions. What are all possible options, including doing nothing? What would each option look like in practice? What are the trade-offs of each choice? What options haven't we considered? Consequence questions. What could go wrong with each option? What could go better than expected? How would we know if we made the right choice? What's reversible and what's permanent? Questions for learning and growth. Reflection questions. What went well and why? What would I do differently? What surprised me? What patterns am I noticing? Development questions. What skills do I need to develop? What knowledge gaps do I have? Who could help me learn this? What's the smallest step I could take? Part 4, Advanced Questioning Techniques. The Ladder of Inference, developed by organizational learning expert Chris Argyris. This technique helps examine how we reach conclusions. Observable data, what actually happened? Selected data, what did I pay attention to? Interpreted meanings, what did I think it meant? Assumptions, what did I assume? Conclusions, what did I conclude? Beliefs, what beliefs does this reinforce? Actions, what actions did I take? Key questions, what data am I selecting and what am I ignoring? What other interpretations are possible? What assumptions am I making? How did I reach this conclusion? The 5 Whys technique. This method, developed by Toyota, involves asking why 5 times in succession. Example, why did the machine stop? The circuit breaker tripped. Why did the circuit breaker trip? There was an electrical overload. Why was there an overload? The motor bearing wasn't properly lubricated. Why wasn't it lubricated? The lubrication schedule wasn't followed. Why wasn't the schedule followed? No one was assigned responsibility. Root cause, lack of assigned responsibility for maintenance question stacking. This technique involves asking multiple related questions to explore different angles. Primary question, how can we improve customer satisfaction? Stack questions, what do our customers value most? What frustrates them about our current service? How do our competitors handle similar challenges? What would customers say if they designed our service? What metrics best capture customer satisfaction? Part 5, Practical Applications. Questions for meetings. Meeting purpose questions. What specific outcome do we need from this meeting? What decisions need to be made? What information do we need to share? How will we know the meeting was successful? Discussion questions. What perspectives haven't we heard? What questions should we be asking that we're not? What would need to be true for this proposal to work? What are we missing? Questions for relationships. Understanding questions. What's most important to you in this situation? How do you see this differently than I do? What would help you feel heard? What outcome would work for both of us? Conflict resolution questions. What's the real issue here? What do we both want? What's negotiable and what's not? How can we move forward together? Questions for self-reflection. Daily reflection questions. What did I learn today? What challenged my assumptions? What questions did I avoid asking? How did I grow today? Weekly review questions. What patterns do I notice in my thinking? What questions am I consistently avoiding? Where am I making assumptions? What would I do differently? Part 6. Common questioning pitfalls and how to avoid them. Leading questions. Problem. Questions that push toward a desired answer. Example. Don't you think this approach is better? Better. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each approach? Loaded questions. Problem. Questions with embedded assumptions. Example. How can we fix your communication problem? Better. How would you describe the current communication dynamics? Overwhelming questions. Problem. Multiple questions asked simultaneously. Example. What happened? Why did it happen? And what should we do next? Better. Ask one question at a time and wait for complete answers. Judgmental questions. Problem. Questions that imply criticism. Example. Why didn't you think of that? Better. What other approaches might we consider? Part 7. Building your question arsenal. Daily practice exercises. Exercise 1. The question journal. Each day, write down 3 questions you wish you had asked but didn't. Reflect on what held you back and how you might ask them differently. Exercise 2. The 5-level challenge. Choose a current situation and write questions at each of the 5 levels discussed earlier. Notice how deeper levels reveal new insights. Exercise 3. Assumption hunting. In conversations, practice identifying assumptions, yours and others, and asking questions to examine them. Exercise 4. The perspective shift. For any situation, ask, how would different stakeholders see this? Generate questions from multiple viewpoints. Advanced questioning challenges. Challenge 1. The devil's advocate. For any position you hold strongly, generate 5 questions that challenge it. This builds intellectual humility and reveals blind spots. Challenge 2. The beginner's mind. Approach familiar topics as if you know nothing. Ask basic questions that experts often skip. Challenge 3. The future archaeologist. Imagine you're studying current events from 100 years in the future. What questions would you ask to understand the true significance of today's decisions? Part 8. The ripple effect of better questions. Personal transformation. When you consistently ask better questions, you develop deeper understanding. You see beyond surface appearances. Better decisions. You consider more factors and perspectives. Stronger relationships. You show genuine interest in others' thoughts. Continuous learning. You remain curious and open to new ideas. Reduced assumptions. You question what you take for granted. Professional impact. Better questioning skills lead to improved problem solving. You identify root causes instead of treating symptoms. Enhanced leadership. You help others think more clearly. Better innovation. You challenge conventional thinking. Stronger teams. You facilitate more productive discussions. Clearer communication. You help others articulate their thoughts. Organizational benefits. Organizations that embrace questioning culture's experience. Reduced errors. Problems are identified and addressed earlier. Faster learning. Knowledge is shared more effectively. Better adaptation. Changes are anticipated and managed proactively. Higher engagement. Employees feel heard and valued. Improved performance. Decision-making becomes more rigorous. Conclusion. Your journey as a master questioner. The art of asking better questions is not about having all the answers. It's about having the curiosity and courage to seek deeper understanding. Every question you ask is an investment in clarity, wisdom, and truth. As you develop this skill, remember that questioning is not about interrogation or criticism. It's about genuine curiosity and the desire to understand. The best questions come from a place of humility, recognizing that there's always more to learn. Start small. Choose one questioning technique from his chapter and practice it this week. Notice how it changes your conversations, decisions, and understanding. Then gradually expand your questioning repertoire. Remember, the person who asks the best questions controls the conversation, discovers the most insights, and ultimately makes the best decisions. In a world overflowing with information, the ability to ask the right questions is your superpower. Your journey as a critical thinker begins with a single question: what question should I be asking that I'm not? Key takeaways. Questions are tools for discovery, not just information gathering. The 5 levels of questioning reveal progressively deeper insights. Different situations require different questioning strategies. Practice and reflection are essential for developing questioning skills. Better questions lead to better thinking, decisions, and relationships. Next steps. Choose one questioning technique to practice this week. Start a question journal to track your learning. Apply the 5-level questioning model to a current challenge. Share these techniques with colleagues or family members. Reflect on how better questions are changing your thinking. Chapter 3: Mastering the Thinker's Mindset. The journey toward intellectual mastery begins not with what we know, but with how we approach the unknown. The foundation of intellectual humility. Critical thinking reaches its highest expression when we embrace intellectual humility. The recognition that our knowledge is limited, our perspectives are partial, and our reasoning is fallible. This humility is not self-deprecation or lack of confidence. Rather, it represents a mature understanding of human cognition's inherent limitations. When we acknowledge these boundaries, we create space for genuine learning and growth. This foundation of humility naturally leads us to question our own assumptions. The strongest critical thinkers regularly examine their beliefs, asking not just, "What do I think?" but "Why do I think this, and what evidence supports my position?" They understand that confidence in one's reasoning should be proportional to the quality of evidence and the rigor of the thinking process that produced it. Such self-examination reveals the complexity of most significant questions. Simple answers to complex problems often indicate incomplete thinking rather than profound insight. The humble thinker appreciates nuance, recognizes multiple valid perspectives, and remains comfortable with uncertainty when evidence is insufficient for definitive conclusions. Cultivating intellectual curiosity. Where humility creates openness, curiosity provides the driving force for exploration. Intellectual curiosity transforms learning from a passive reception of information into an active pursuit of understanding. The curious mind asks why and how, not just about unfamiliar topics, but about familiar ones that most people take for granted. This curiosity manifests in several distinct ways. First, there's the curiosity about facts and information, wanting to know what happened, when, and where. Second, there's conceptual curiosity, which seeks to understand how things work, why they work that way, and what principles govern their operation. Third, there's metacuriosity, which examines our own thinking processes and asks how we can think more effectively. The cultivation of curiosity requires intentional practice. One powerful technique is the 5 whys method, where you ask why 5 times in succession about any phenomenon or belief. This simple practice often reveals hidden assumptions and deeper questions that merit further investigation. Another approach is to regularly seek out perspectives that challenge your existing views, not to adopt them uncritically, but to understand how reasonable people can reach different conclusions. Curiosity also demands that we become comfortable with not knowing. The phrase, "I don't know," should be viewed not as an admission of failure, but as an honest assessment that opens possibilities for learning. The curious person sees ignorance as a starting point rather than a destination, and confusion as a sign that learning is taking place. The architecture of lifelong learning. Building on curiosity, lifelong learning represents the systematic pursuit of knowledge and wisdom throughout one's entire existence. This goes beyond formal education to encompass all the ways we can continue growing intellectually, emotionally, and practically. The lifelong learner understands that in a rapidly changing world, the ability to learn continuously is more valuable than any specific knowledge or skill. Effective lifelong learning requires both breadth and depth. Breadth involves maintaining curiosity about diverse fields and perspectives, recognizing that insights from one domain often illuminate problems in another. A principle from biology might inform business strategy. A concept from psychology might enhance historical understanding. This interdisciplinary thinking prevents the intellectual silos that limit creative problem-solving. Depth, however, ensures that our learning goes beyond surface-level familiarity. The lifelong learner chooses certain areas for intensive study, developing genuine expertise that provides a solid foundation for understanding related fields. This depth prevents the shallow thinking that comes from knowing a little about everything but understanding nothing deeply. The most effective lifelong learners develop meta-learning skills. They learn how to learn. They understand their own learning styles, recognize when they're truly comprehending versus merely memorizing, and can adapt their learning strategies to different types of material. They know when to read slowly and when to skim, when to take detailed notes and when to simply absorb, when to seek additional sources and when to move on. Developing mental models and frameworks. The accumulation of knowledge becomes truly powerful when organized into coherent mental models. These models serve as frameworks for understanding new information, making decisions, and solving problems. The skilled thinker doesn't just collect facts. They build interconnected systems of understanding that help make sense of complex situations. Effective mental models share several characteristics. They are simple enough to be practically useful, yet sophisticated enough to capture important nuances. They are flexible enough to adapt to new information, yet stable enough to provide reliable guidance. They are specific enough to generate testable predictions, yet general enough to apply across multiple contexts. The development of mental models requires both analytical and synthetic thinking. Analysis breaks down complex situations into component parts, while synthesis assembles these parts into coherent wholes. The skilled thinker moves fluidly between these modes, using analysis to understand the details and synthesis to grasp the big picture. One particularly valuable mental model is the concept of systems thinking. This approach recognizes that most important phenomena result from the interaction of multiple elements within complex systems. Systems thinking helps us understand feedback loops, unintended consequences, and emergent properties that linear thinking often misses. The practice of intellectual courage. While humility and curiosity lay the groundwork for effective thinking, intellectual courage provides the strength to act on our convictions. This courage manifests in several ways. The willingness to challenge popular but poorly supported ideas, the strength to admit when we're wrong, and the persistence to continue thinking through difficult problems even when easy answers are available. Intellectual courage often requires standing alone with unpopular but well-reasoned positions. The courageous thinker is willing to be wrong publicly if that's what honest inquiry demands. They understand that social approval is less important than intellectual integrity, and that the discomfort of being disagreed with is a small price to pay for the satisfaction of thinking clearly. This courage extends to our willingness to change our minds when evidence warrants. The intellectually courageous person sees changing their mind as a sign of growth rather than weakness. They understand that consistency for its own sake is intellectual rigidity, and that the ability to update our beliefs based on new evidence is a crucial component of rational thinking. Courage also involves the willingness to engage with difficult questions that have no easy answers. Many of the most important questions in life, about meaning, morality, justice, and human nature, resist simple solutions. The courageous thinker engages with these questions anyway, knowing that the process of thinking through them is valuable even if definitive answers remain elusive. Building resilience against cognitive biases. Understanding our cognitive limitations leads naturally to developing strategies for managing them. While we cannot eliminate our biases entirely, we can learn to recognize when they're most likely to influence our thinking and develop habits that minimize their impact. This requires both knowledge of specific biases and practical techniques for countering them. Confirmation bias, perhaps the most pervasive of all cognitive biases, leads us to seek information that supports our existing beliefs while avoiding information that challenges them. The skilled thinker actively seeks out disconfirming evidence, asking not just what supports my position, but what evidence would change my mind. They cultivate relationships with people who disagree with them respectfully and seek out sources that present alternative viewpoints. Availability bias causes us to overestimate the probability of events that come easily to mind, often because they're recent or dramatic. To counter this, effective thinkers rely on systematic data rather than vivid anecdotes when making important decisions. They understand that the most memorable examples are often the least representative. Anchoring bias leads us to rely too heavily on the first piece of information we encounter about a topic. Skilled thinkers combat this by deliberately seeking multiple perspectives before forming judgments, and by regularly revisiting their initial impressions to see if they remain justified as more information becomes available. The social dimensions of critical thinking. Critical thinking is not a solitary activity, but a fundamentally social endeavor. Our best thinking often emerges through dialogue with others who bring different perspectives, knowledge, and ways of reasoning to bear on shared problems. The skilled thinker knows how to collaborate intellectually while maintaining their own analytical independence. Effective intellectual collaboration requires several key skills. First is the ability to listen actively, not just waiting for your turn to speak, but genuinely trying to understand what others are saying and why they believe it. Second is the capacity to disagree respectfully, challenging ideas without attacking people. Third is the wisdom to know when to persist with an unpopular position and when to acknowledge that others may have valid points you hadn't considered. The social nature of thinking also means that we must be thoughtful about our sources of information and influence. In an age of information abundance, the ability to evaluate sources becomes crucial. The skilled thinker considers not just what is being said, but who is saying it, what their motivations might be, and what their track record suggests about their reliability. Building and maintaining relationships with people who think differently requires intentional effort. It's natural to gravitate toward those who share our views, but intellectual growth requires exposure to different perspectives. The wise thinker cultivates a diverse network of relationships that challenges their thinking while providing emotional support for the difficult work of changing their mind when evidence warrants it. Developing judgment and wisdom. The ultimate goal of critical thinking is not just to analyze information, but to develop sound judgment. Judgment involves the ability to make good decisions in complex situations where complete information is unavailable and where multiple valid considerations must be balanced. This capacity emerges gradually through practice and reflection. Good judgment requires the integration of analytical thinking with intuitive wisdom. While analysis helps us understand the components of a situation, intuition helps us grasp patterns and possibilities that purely logical analysis might miss. The skilled thinker learns to trust their intuition while subjecting it to analytical scrutiny. Wisdom involves understanding not just what we can know, but what we should do with that knowledge. It encompasses questions of values, priorities, and purpose that go beyond mere technical competence. The wise person asks not just, can we do this, but should we do this? And what are the likely consequences for all affected parties? The development of judgment and wisdom requires both breadth of experience and depth of reflection. We must expose ourselves to diverse situations and perspectives, but we must also take time to think deeply about what we've experienced and what we've learned. The unreflective life may be full of activity, but it rarely produces wisdom, creating systems for continuous improvement. The commitment to lifelong learning requires the development of systems that support continuous improvement in our thinking. These systems help us maintain our intellectual edge over time and prevent the gradual decline in curiosity and openness that can accompany age and success. One crucial system is regular self-assessment. This involves periodically examining our beliefs, decisions, and thinking processes to identify areas for improvement. The skilled thinker maintains a learning journal, recording not just what they've learned, but how they've learned it and what thinking strategies proved most effective. Another important system is the deliberate practice of thinking skills. Just as athletes practice specific movements until they become automatic, skilled thinkers practice specific mental operations until they become natural. This might involve regularly analyzing arguments, practicing probabilistic reasoning, or deliberately seeking out complex problems to solve. Building feedback loops into our thinking process ensures that we learn from our mistakes. The skilled thinker tracks their predictions and decisions over time, noting which ones proved accurate and which ones didn't. This feedback helps calibrate confidence levels and identify systematic errors in reasoning. Finally, maintaining intellectual community provides ongoing support for growth. This might involve joining book clubs, attending lectures, participating in online discussions, or simply maintaining relationships with people who challenge your thinking. The key is to create regular opportunities for intellectual stimulation and growth. The paradox of expertise. As we develop expertise in critical thinking, we must guard against the very confidence that expertise can bring. There is a paradox at the heart of intellectual development. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know, yet the more confident we may become in our ability to figure things out. Managing this paradox requires ongoing vigilance and humility. True expertise involves knowing the limits of our knowledge. The expert can distinguish between areas where they have genuine competence and areas where they're merely informed amateurs. They understand that expertise in one domain doesn't automatically transfer to other domains, and they're appropriately humble when venturing outside their areas of genuine competence. The expert also understands that expertise is domain-specific and context-dependent. What works in one situation may not work in another, and what was true in the past may not be true today. The skilled thinker remains alert to changes in context that might require new approaches or conclusions. Perhaps most importantly, the expert maintains what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, the openness and eagerness of a beginner, even when dealing with familiar subjects. This mindset prevents the intellectual arrogance that can come with expertise and maintains the curiosity that drives continued learning. Conclusion: the lifelong journey. The development of a thinker's mindset is not a destination, but a journey, one that continues throughout our lives. Each day presents new opportunities to practice humility, exercise curiosity, and deepen our understanding. The skills and attitudes we've explored in this chapter require constant cultivation and refinement. The rewards of this journey extend far beyond improved decision-making or problem-solving. They include the deep satisfaction of understanding, the joy of discovery, and a sense of connection that comes from genuine dialogue with others. The person who commits to developing their thinking abilities embarks on a path of continuous growth and discovery. As you continue your own journey of intellectual development, remember that perfection is not the goal. The goal is progress, becoming a little bit better at thinking clearly, a little bit more open to new ideas, a little bit more humble about what you don't know. These small improvements compound over time, leading to significant growth in your capacity for wisdom and understanding. The world needs people who can think clearly, who remain curious about important questions, and who have the courage to pursue truth wherever it leads. By developing your own thinker's mindset, you contribute not only to your own growth, but to the broader human project of understanding our world and our place in it. This is work that matters, work that makes a difference, and work that deserves our best efforts. In the end, the master thinker is not one who has learned everything, but one who has learned how to keep learning. The journey continues, and each step forward opens new horizons of possibility. This audiobook is not just a message, it's a wake-up call. Dr. Julian Vance walks you through the deep truth of mastering critical thinking. As always, thank you for listening, and always remember, keep listening. Keep growing. Who stops reading, stops growing.